then they'll give you the money. Yep.
Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I now declare the third working group session of the Multilateral Assessment under the fourth cycle of the International Assessment and Review process for open. May I begin to warmly welcome you to this SBI event, and in particular the representatives of the 5 parties that will be multilaterally assessed today. As demonstrated during previous MA sessions, I am once again looking forward to the insightful and constructive interaction among parties. It is vital that we continue to build strong foundation for a transparency framework under the Paris Agreement. The MA session of the 10 parties, which will take place here in Glasgow, is organized in 2 parts and will be followed by a joint closing of the FSV and MA tomorrow afternoon. Part 1 will be held today from 15:30 to 17:30, and 5 parties, Kazakhstan, Croatia, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Luxembourg, will undergo the MA. Part 2 will be convened tomorrow from 15:30 to 17:30 in the same room. Another 5 parties, Monaco, Poland, Romania, Slovenia, and the United Kingdom, will undergo MA tomorrow. This part then will be followed by a joint closing of FSV and MA. As a part of the International Assessment and Review process, the MA consists of 3 stages. First, a 3-month question and answer period, which takes place before the working group session. During this period, 152 questions were received from 8 parties. You can assess all these questions and answers via the MA country webpage. Second, an in-session multilateral assessment is held, which starts here today. And thirdly, a summary report, which is prepared for each party. These reports will be made available on each party's MA party webpage. Clearly, it has been an enormous effort made to get us to this MA session today, and I want to acknowledge everyone's work. Despite the challenging circumstances, 41 parties and 165 technical review experts have engaged virtually in reviews under the 4th biannual reports over the course of 2020 and 21. You have been working from your homes, from your living rooms, with your family around you at the most awkward hours. And I want to thank you wholeheartedly for all that hard work under such difficult circumstances. Let me also thank all parties and experts for making a continuous and dedicated effort to shape the international assessment and review process. Distinguished delegates, having opened this MA session, I would like to extend my gratitude to Vice Chair Ambassador Yu and to Additional Rapporteur Professor Katalis for agreeing to chair the 2 parts of the MA here in Glasgow. And without further delay, I would like to invite Ambassador Yu to chair the first session of the MA. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm honored to chair this MA session. And before starting this session, I'd like to say that all of you will stay safe and healthy at this COP26 in the context of COVID-19. Having said that, I'd like to begin this session. First, let me go through a few formalities. We kindly request that delegates wear masks at all times during meetings unless they take the floor to intervene. To request the floor, please press the white button to request the floor and wait for your number to be called. Then you can take the floor. The MA session will be broadcast live in YouTube, and the recording will be made available on the respective parties' MA webpage after this session. Parties will also be able to participate remotely through the COP26 platform. To ensure the effective time management of this session and taking into account the limited time available, parties on the MA have prepared pre-recorded presentations that have been posted in the MA website prior to this session. I hope you have been able to view these presentations before this session. Today, each party will be asked to deliver a short statement, which will then be followed by questions. I will take a block of questions from several parties at once, and then ask the party under assessment to respond to these questions before moving on to the next round of questions. I will give the floor to parties under assessment as outlined in the schedule on the MA and the Climate Change Conference web pages. After the last party has been assessed on Saturday, if time permits, I will take up any statements by parties regarding their experience in the IAR process. Now, I'd like to invite Kazakhstan to make a short statement. This statement will be delivered by Aynur Kopeva from the Ministry of Ecology, Geology, and Natural Resources. Ms. Kopeva, you have the floor. Number 50, Kazakhstan, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and dear delegates. My name is Aynur Kopbaeva. I work in the Ministry of Ecology, Geology, and Natural Resources of the Republic of Kazakhstan, Deputy Director, Climate Policy and Green Technology Department. And with me, my colleagues from our department, Chief Expert Ms. Aida Aliyeva, and from supporting our organization from Jasseldamu, Mr. Zufar and Ms. Ayman, and our colleague from UNDP office, which supporting this work. It's my pleasure to present to you Kazakhstan's efforts to implement economy-wide target. This year, Kazakhstan's fourth biennial report have gone through the centralized review by the ERT, and today it's my pleasure to make a brief statement at this SBI session. The pre-recorded presentation was submitted to the UNFCCC Secretariat in due time. The national greenhouse gas emission in 2019 is classified by the sector of economy. So the largest emitting sector is the energy supply, which contributes 41%. The largest emitting sector in the energy supply, which contributes 41%. The second one of the residential 21%. The next sector is business, 15%. The agriculture sector emits 14%, the transport sector has 7%, and the waste management has 1%. The government of Kazakhstan has developed a climate neutrality doctrine in accordance with the President Tokayev announcement that Kazakhstan will achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. The government of Kazakhstan has also developed the update NDC and NDC implementation plan for 2021-2030. According to the plan, the following measures will be implemented, which will help to reduce GHG emission. The energy intensity of GDP should decrease by almost 39%, and the carbon intensity should be decreased by 41% by 2030. The share of coal in the electricity production should decrease from 69% to 40%. The carbon price envisaged to increase from 1 to 50 US dollars. In addition to that, small emitters will be the subject to carbon tax. It should be noted that the modeling was conducted before announcement of some additional measures presented in NDC implementation roadmap. Both these documents are currently under the consideration by the government of Kazakhstan. Implementation of the climate change policy at the country level requires constructive interrelations between all key stakeholders, including the key ministers, business companies, science, and non-governmental society. It's quite difficult to build such cooperation. Anyway, some progress was achieved at the national level by ongoing and planned activities of gasification of cities and rural settlements. Adaptation to climate change was included into the new environmental code, which was adopted in 2021. Auction and financial mechanism for the enhancement of the renewable and energy efficiency and the energy saving activities have been launched. Domestic emissions trading scheme is operational and can be used as the main tool to decrease carbon emissions. It's needed to admit that there is challenge in transitioning to greener alternatives due to resistance of the energy sector. Mainstreaming NDC targets to other sectoral programs is also a challenge. Lack of knowledge and experience to introduce innovative tools for offsetting and to apply international market-based mechanisms is another problem to be resolved in the near future. More capacity building is needed for national practitioners and to better understand climate action and transparency frameworks. In conclusion, I would like to inform you that we have received 20 questions covering 3 categories and answers were provided. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Kazakhstan. And now I'd like to open the floor for questions from parties. I will collect a number of questions from parties before inviting the delegate from Kazakhstan to respond. And in the context of COVID-19, we have the big room, so the speakers are requested to get close to mic for better hearing your questions and statements. And now I can find then India, number 48. You have the floor.
Thank you, Vice Chair. At the outset, thanks for giving us floor. And at the outset, I would like to congratulate Kazakhstan, who is also the neighbor in the sitting arrangement here. So please accept our congratulations for submitting the 4th BR. We find that the total emissions of Kazakhstan are 396.570 million tons. But when you say about net emissions, the emissions are 401.885 million tons. So this gives us to imagine that the LULUCF sector is rather a net emitter. So could you please tell us if there is any other reason, and also what steps you propose to take to enhance the LULUCF sector so that the net emissions are not more than the gross emissions? That's our first part of the question. The second part of the question is on page 28 of your BR. There is a concept of transition of Kazakhstan to a green economy, and the targets for energy intensity of GDP are 25, 30, and 50% below 2008 level by 2020, 2030, and 2050 respectively, which is a very nice thing to note. We wanted to have an update regarding the status of the target achieved by 2020. And last point that we would like to make is that in the figure 2.6 on page 13 of BR, figure 2.6, I repeat, on page 13, there is a mention of other sectors. So in the other sectors category of the inventory, the emissions are fluctuating from 2001 to 17. Could you please also tell us how and why? And lastly, the emission reduction impacts in the strategic plan of the Ministry of Energy of the Republic of Kazakhstan for 2017 to 21. Would you like to update us on that? Once again, our heartiest congratulations, and over to you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, India. And now EU number 66, EU, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, colleagues. It's really good to be here and meet physically after so long. To Kazakhstan, also thank you very much for your presentation and for providing replies to the EU's questions. We have one. Based on according to the CTF tables that you submitted, together with the fourth biennial report, fugitive emissions from fuels constitute the most important source of methane emissions in the country. Do you see any particular challenges that make it difficult to implement policies to address methane emissions, other than the policy you have to ban gas flaring? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And now I can find Japan request the floor. Number 51, Japan, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you also Kazakhstan for your pre-recorded presentation and also answering to our questions. It's very nice to be here, seeing people face to face. We would like to ask about mitigation measures in the agriculture sector. So emissions from the agriculture sector are projected to increase significantly in both scenarios as a result of increases in the number of livestock and fertilizer applications. What measures will be taken in the future to reduce methane and NCO emissions from livestock, rice cultivation, and agricultural soil? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Japan. And number 53, UK, you have the floor. And after the question from UK, I'd like to give the floor to Kazakhstan to respond to these questions. And UK, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to Kazakhstan both for your pre-recorded presentation, your presentation today, and also for your response to our questions. You mentioned today that building collaboration between government, business, and civil society and academia will be crucial for achieving climate goals at the national level, but this has been quite challenging to date. I guess our question is, what have the main challenges been? How will you address these moving forward? And what advice would you give to parties who may be facing similar challenges? Thank you very much.
Thank you, UK. Now we have the first round of questions, so I'd like to give the floor to Kazakhstan to respond to these questions. Kazakhstan, you have the floor.
For all questions, Mr. Chair, if it's possible, my colleagues from my office we will help to answer these questions.
Kazakhstan. So if you need more time to prepare these questions, then can you continue to get the questions from the floors? So how do you think about that? Or you are ready to respond to these questions? I'd like to know whether or not you prefer the continuity of the questions.
Apologize, we need more time to prepare these questions. Can you continue soon?
Okay, see, on the request of the Kazakhstan, let's continue to have the questions from the floor. So now I can see the 25, Czech Republic. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, all. I also feel that it's great to be here in person. I have a question for Kazakhstan about the targets for renewable energy. But before that, I would like to say thank you for your excellent presentation. And the question is, in Kazakhstan's fourth biennial report, target indicators for 2020 are provided for various renewable energy sources. Could you provide some general information on the progress towards achieving these targets, for example, on those energy sources which made most progress towards the target? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Czech Republic. And now I give the floor to number 26, Slovakia. Slovakia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for the floor, and Kazakhstan for the pre-recorded presentation and statement. It is really good to be here and be able to discuss face-to-face. Slovakia has a question for Kazakhstan. In Kazakhstan presentation, renewable energy auctions are mentioned as an example of the successful implementation of climate change measures. Could you provide some additional information on these energy auctions, and if you have some lessons learned which may be of interest of other countries? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Slovakia. And now the number 28, Australia. 28, Australia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And I'd like to congratulate Kazakhstan on their report and presentation, and thank the representative for a presentation today. My question is on section 4.2.12, policies and measures in the industrial processes sector, which states that progress in the achievement of target indicators of the state program for industrial and innovative development of the Republic of Kazakhstan for 2015 to 2019 is monitored, and it states an increase in output of volumes of the processing industry will grow by 43% against 2012, with an increase in labour productivity of the processing industry by 1.4 times and a decrease in power intensity of the processing industry by 15%. Could Kazakhstan please provide further detail on the measures it plans to use to increase output while decreasing power intensity? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Australia. Now I'd like to give the floor to number 58, China. Number 58, China, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, SBI Chair. And also China would like to congratulate Kazakhstan for this MA session. And before we give specific questions to our colleagues from Kazakhstan, China would like to raise the concern of the process of this not displaying the pre-recorded presentations. As we see that there's a very nice prepared pre-recorded presentations, not only prepared by our colleagues from Kazakhstan, but also other colleagues. And actually, this was not the case before. I remember last December when China had the second FSV, we had prepared or pre-recorded presentations. We had them played during the climate dialogue. And that also the case in the June session, this June session, that we have the chance to play that. And I'm raising this not because of we do not have time to look at that, but I think the purpose of the MA and FSV sessions during the COP or the SBI sessions is to promote the transparency or to trigger these Q&A sessions among parties to better understand each other's policies and measures. And in this way, I think it's better that we have these slides presentations. Ideally, as a way before, we have them to present it by someone with the slides. But due to the COVID-19 circumstances, we had the pre-recorded presentations, which we also think works fine. But now we see that the time has been constrained a little bit more, that we do not have the time for the parties to present their slides or even their pre-recorded presentations during these multilateral sessions. I have a little bit worried because this may set a prerequisite into the implementation period of our Paris Agreement in the future. Because as we all aware that in the future we will have this FMCP process in the future, that we do think that's also a very important arena for parties to share their national NDC tracking progress and their inventory as well as their capacity building needs. So we do hope that we could have the parties the more space and time to present their findings, not to constrain the time for parties. Like we see that less and less time for parties to present along this session. So we do ask for your clarification that if we could play the pre-recorded video for other parties during this session, or how we can move forward. And then please give microphone 59, my colleagues, for some specific questions. Thank you.
So number 59, China. Can you ask a question? Yeah.
Oh, yes. Okay. Thanks for Chair and thanks for Kazakhstan for your presentation. And China has a question for Kazakhstan. We noticed that in your presentation, the measure to achieve NDC target, you mentioned that Kazakhstan intends to lowering the cap in ETS and stimulate the carbon price to grow from 1.1 USD to 50.8 USD. We want to ask, how long do you plan to reach this goal? And how are you going to significantly raise the carbon price while ensuring the stability of the carbon market and to guarantee the industry and the companies can afford this cost? Thanks.
Thank you, China. And I can see India. You can also request the floor, number 48.
Yes. Thank you, Chair, for giving us the floor again. This was in solidarity with our brothers and sisters from Kazakhstan. They have, through you, Chair, they have requested the parties present here for additional time. As far as India is concerned, we are with them and they can send the reply by any means that they deem fit subsequently. I hope our brothers and sisters need some more time to dig into those pages and then respond. We are with them. We have no issues. If the answers are provided subsequently as deemed fit by them. With these words, we again congratulate our brothers and sisters from Kazakhstan for excellent pre-recorded presentation as well as the statements made today. Thank you, Chair, for giving us floor again.
Okay, thank you, India. And Kazakhstan, are you ready to respond to these questions?
Okay, dear colleagues.
50, yeah.
Dear colleagues, I'm national greenhouse gas inventory expert, and I want to answer a question about LULUCF. LULUCF is a sector that emits greenhouse gases due to emissions from cropland. The rest of the sectors are categories and good sinks of greenhouse gases. Cropland is discarded due to soil degradation processes and consequently the loss of carbon from the soil, which has been observed since 1990. Measures to preserve fertility are currently being developed. On the issue of growing emissions from the agriculture sector, we plan to offset them through the use of effective measures to curb land degradation in the LULUCF sector. Thank you.
Good afternoon, dear delegates. Thank you for all your questions. So we'll try to provide support for answers. To our colleague from India, regarding the concept on transition of green economy and the targets on energy intensity that are reflected in the green economy concept, we would like to tell that progress is ongoing, and the target to achieve the reduce the energy intensity by 2020 was achieved at the moment by 20%. And as regarding questions related on modeling, unfortunately, we don't have together with us our technical experts, and with your kind permission, we would like to provide these answers in the written form later. And regarding the EU questions on methane emissions program and difficulties, we would like to say that the country does not have any program or plans on methane emission reductions, but there are some analyses conducted, and there are some plans to consider the methane emissions to be included into the market mechanism emission trading system in the next phase of the national allocation plan. For question of from United Kingdom on building collaboration, yes, we need to admit that close coordination of interactions and cooperation of the key line ministries and business community, including research institutes and NGOs, are needed to be improved, and work is ongoing to, especially on the issues for developing carbon neutrality doctrine and the updated NDC. Regarding the question of Czech Republic on renewable energy sources, there is good financial mechanisms are ongoing. Auctions were introduced, and by 2020 there was a target to achieve 3%, and currently this target has achieved almost 4% by 2020, and the target to increase the share of renewables in the electricity generation was increased by 15% up to 2030. And auctions were introduced and showed good results of this financial mechanism. So I would be thankful that for rest questions we'll provide in the written form later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kazakhstan. And if you have more the information from Kazakhstan, you can direct contact with the Kazakhstan delegate. And thank you, delegates, for the questions, and thank you, Kazakhstan, for your responses. And with regard to the question about why the pre-recorded presentation is shown during this session, raised by number 58, China, I'd like to say that owing time and space constraints here in Glasgow as a result of the COVID pandemic, the available time for MA was reduced. As indicated in notification letter to parties on the 14th of September, the parties were requested to pre-record their presentations previous to this session, and those presentations have been made available on the MA website as of last week. Furthermore, parties were encouraged to watch these presentations before this MA session. To maximize the time for party interaction during today's working group session, parties on the MA will be invited to make a short statement, which will be followed by a question and answer session. This will then allow parties to have more time for constructive interaction. And the practice at this session will not preclude the practice for the FMCP under the ETF, as mentioned, the Chinese delegate number 58 mentioned. So therefore, the pre-recorded presentations will not be shown during this session. So I wish you a deep understanding on this situation of COVID-19 pandemic. And now I'd like to invite Croatia to make a short statement. Number 6. This statement will be delivered by the Bisinja Grgasovic from the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development. Ms. Grgasovic, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Dear colleagues, as a highly vulnerable country, Croatia takes climate change very seriously and is taking numerous activities in order to contribute to the EU Green Deal and increased INDC, that is reduction of the emissions for 55% till 2030 in comparison with 1990 level, and for which comprehensive legislative package Fit for 55 was prepared and presented in July this year, and at the moment is under consideration by the member states. Presently, we are undertaking continuous consultations with sectorial policy partners on how to implement more ambitious plans and measures and meet the targets from scenario for achieving of climate neutrality till 2050 and more ambition reduction emissions till 2030 in Croatia. The plan is to accelerate the measures we set in our low carbon strategy, such as increasing the percentage of buildings to be renovated from 1.6 to 3% per year, accelerating the construction of infrastructure for alternative fuels for road transport, and supporting the purchase of zero-emission vehicles. Croatia joined the declaration of accelerating the transition to 100% zero-emission cars and vans. Also, our Prime Minister at Leader Summit announced that coal phase out year is 2033, but we will push out to be even earlier. We increased Croatian 2030 target for renewables amounting to just above 39% in final consumption. Citizens as prosumers will be an important part of fulfillment of that goal. Also, we are improving our networks and grids in order to incorporate this greater share of renewables. Further on, we will speed up of measures of modernization and decarbonization of our industry. In addition to previous afforestation plans, as a highly popular tourist destination, Croatia intends to compensate the impact of tourists on CO2 emissions by planting more than 1 million additional trees annually by 2030. In the implementation of these plans, we are going to engage the whole community. Within the Conference on the Future of Europe activities in the last 2 months, we organized 8 panels and final conference and received concerns, support, messages and proposals from representatives of the sectorial bodies, business sector, union, local governments, educational system, media, youth, civil society, and academia. In parallel, we are improving our transparency framework as a key element for the planning of the policies and measures and monitoring of the implementation progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Croatia. I would now like to open the floor for questions from parties. I will collect a number of questions from parties before inviting the delegate from Croatia to respond. Now the floor is open. I can see number 54. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Croatia, for the presentation and statement. I have a question on institutional arrangements. Croatia's presentation highlighted that one of the main objectives between now and 2030 will be to develop the appropriate organisational and administrative infrastructure to support the climate transition. Could you tell us more about the specific plans you have for ensuring that effective institutional arrangements are in place to facilitate climate action and target achievement? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, UK. And the number 48, India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. At the outset, congratulations to Croatia for the 4th BR. We have just 2 small questions. Our first question is relating to figure 2.2 on page 16 of the BR. It says that emissions increased from 1991 to 2007 and then gradually decreased till 2014. Could Croatia please tell why emissions again increased from 2014 onwards, and what are the plans to contain them? Our second question in the same vein is about in the emission inventory in BR4, the GHG emissions in the transportation sector have increased by 65.6%. from 1990 to 2017. Can Croatia briefly tell what are the plans for addressing this sector? And lastly, more out of curiosity, Croatia's policies and measures aim to improve the energy efficiency and promote renewable energy in the residential and commercial sectors. And the BR talks about annual renovation of apartment buildings and single-family homes and public buildings. So could you please elaborate on the status of implementation of these energy efficiency measures? Thank you, Chair, and to Croatia once again, please accept our congratulations.
Thank you, India. And now number 17, US, United States. You have the floor.
Thank you, Croatia, for your presentation and congratulations on submitting your biennial reporting. Can you please discuss the extent to which Croatia is dependent on EU mitigation actions to achieve domestic emissions reductions and targets, including the EU mitigation actions that are still under development? Thank you.
Thank you, yes. And now number 59, China, you have the floor.
Firstly, China wants to thank Chair for your explanation of our question. The reason we raise this question is that we think it's an important and valuable opportunity for parties to present their efforts and achievements. We are glad to hear that this will not be a precedent for FMCP. And we really hope that if we can finish our related negotiation this COP, we can have more time for MA and FSV in the future. And secondly, we have a question for Croatia. We want to ask that we noticed that the transport is the main source for your emissions. And we want to, could you please share, do you have more plans or goals in transport sector, such as the goal on electric vehicle and charging stations? Thanks.
Thank you, China. So your perspective will be well recognized in the future. And now the number 28, Australia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to Croatia for their report and for their presentation. I note that Croatia's report describes the expected significance of hydrogen in future energy and transport systems. Could Croatia provide an update on its plans to establish a hydrogen technology platform? Thank you.
Now, that's all the questions from the parties. So I'd like to give the floor to Croatia to respond to these questions. Number 6, Croatia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. At first, on question posed by the Czech Republic, we tend to establish good cooperation with the sectorial body and all community because it is necessary to be successful in the implementation of the measures. We establish two bodies that are adopted by the government. One is for the committee for the inventory, and the second one is for the implementation of the policy and measures, mitigation and adaptation policies and measures. And we've got one coordination group that is made from the directors from the different ministries, and the two technical working groups, one for mitigation and one for adaptation, where we've got more than 40 experts included, and from academia, business society, civil society, and for the competent bodies. On the first question posed by the India, why emissions increased. So our emissions increased till 2007 because they dropped heavily due to the domestic war between 1990 and 1995. When then we started to recover our economy. Then due to crisis in 2008, our emissions and the whole economy dropped for the second time, and then started to be recovered after 2014. But then with the implementation of the measures, we succeeded to make decoupling of the economy growth and from the emissions, because economy growth increased further on while our emissions started to decrease. Yes, we've got on the second one question of the India, we've got and also posed by the China. We've got a huge concern because of emissions from the transportation sector, and now we already started to implement more ambitious measures. We secured 300 million of kunas of our auctioning revenues and in other funds for the supporting of the establishing of the infrastructure for the alternative fuels, and also supporting of the purchase of the emissions, zero emission vehicles. So we believe that measures will have effect and will increase share of low carbon and zero carbon vehicles on the market. Also, I think that the situation will be improved by the set of this new proposed legislative proposal that impose many stricter measures to the transportation sector, improved standards. Then transportation sector, road transportation sector will be included in emission trading scheme. So such measures will affect emissions and will improve this situation. Also, we envisage, and that is connected to the question of the Australia, to start to use hydrogen. At the moment, we are under preparation of the hydrogen strategy. We expect that this will be finalized at the end of this year. And to use in maritime transportation and also in railway transport in the parts of the railway rails where we don't have electricity network established. Then in respect of renovation, a third question posed by the India, we also secured some 500 million of kunas for the renovation of the family buildings in this period up to 25, and also other source of the finance for the renovation of the public buildings, commercial buildings, and also residential buildings. At the moment, we've got problem that due to 2 earthquakes that happened last year, that we have to undertake renovation, and in respect of seismic conditions of the buildings. So that's the problematic, that such measures are more expensive, and also these parts doesn't influence to the emissions. So that's this something that is problematic since the renovation is more expensive, but now we tend to find out reliable sources for the financing of the renovation in the extent that is needed. Yes, now related to the question posed by the US. Croatia, as a member of the European Union, also is undertaking all policies and measures. The main instruments are emission trading scheme and sectors that are not covered by the emission trading schemes. For that, we've got target. So till the 2030, at the moment we've got -7, but by the new legislation, this target is increased to -16.7. Also, we are part of the measures for from the LULUCF sector and other policy measures like increase of share of renewables, increase of energy efficiency, and other policy and measures. And I think that I answered to all questions.
Okay, thank you delegates for the questions, and thank you Croatia for the responses. I would now like to invite Iceland, number 15, to make a short statement. This statement will be delivered by the Helga Baro Idotiro from the Ministry of the Environment and Natural Resources. Ms. Baro Idotiro, you have the floor.
Thank you, chairs and colleagues, and good afternoon. Nice to be here with you all. I would like to start by saying that we believe that the whole MA process is valuable for Iceland, and I would like to thank the review team as well as all the 8 parties that showed interest by submitting written questions to Iceland during the process. We hope to have provided you all with sufficient answers, and they can now be found at the MA portal. And Iceland presentation has also been uploaded at the MA portal, and there our climate targets are explained, as well as our climate action plan. The climate action plan, presented last year with 15 different economy-wide measures, is the main instrument in reaching the 2030 target. Iceland has updated its NDC with an enhanced economy-wide target of 55% reduction in 2030 compared to 1990, a target to be reached in joint effort with the EU, its member states, and Norway. Iceland has declared that climate neutrality is to be reached no later than 2040, and the climate neutrality goal has been enacted in our Climate Act. Iceland has also recently submitted its first long-term strategy to the UNFCCC, and the next steps are to define the path Iceland will take to be able to reach that goal. We are proud of our energy profile, as Iceland boasts of 100% renewables for electricity production, as well as for house heating. However, there is still some way to go regarding the transition from fossil fuel in the transport sector and in the fishing industry. Our energy strategy sets the goal of fossil fuel-free Iceland in 2050. Iceland is currently developing its first national adaptation plan based on Iceland's first adaptation strategy, which was issued in September this year. Attention has been paid to adaptation planning to secure synergies between measures relating to adaptation and mitigation. Iceland is fully committed to support global climate action and to increase its contribution to climate-related development cooperation. And for further information, I would like to point to the MI portal for where our presentation has been uploaded and our reports can be found. Thank you.
Thank you, Iceland. I would now like to open the floor for questions from parties. I will collect a number of questions from parties before inviting the delegate from Iceland to respond. The floor is open. I can see the 57, Switzerland. You have the floor.
Thank you. Switzerland thanks Iceland for the presentation and the very detailed and insightful answers to the written question we asked about land use change, and forestry. We now have a question on another topic. we would be interested to know in a little bit more details about Iceland's approach to the build-up of charging stations as measures to support transition to a fossil-free transport sector. What is the role of the government in this area, and how are other players, public or private, contributing to the observed trends? In addition, what are Iceland's experiences about regulation in the building sector as a means to promote the installation of charging stations? What factors in the design or in this measure have allowed the successful amendment of this regulation? Thank you.
Thank you, Switzerland. And now, the 66, you have the floor.
Thank you, Iceland, for your excellent presentation and also for providing replies to the written questions by the European Union. We have, it's a very similar question or related question to my colleague from Switzerland. In your fourth biennial report, it says that the share of electric vehicles in newly registered passenger vehicles showed important increases in recent years. Which are the main policies and measures that facilitated this increase of electric vehicles in Iceland? Thank you.
Thank you. And number 53, the UK. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Iceland for an excellent presentation. You mentioned that Iceland's currently preparing the National Adaptation Plan based on the National Adaptation Strategy published in September. Could you tell us a bit more about these plans? And you mentioned there will be kind of synergies and they'll look at the co-benefits for mitigation and adaptation. Could you tell us a bit more about how the strategy will address these? Thank you very much.
Thank you, UK. And the 25, Czech Republic. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Iceland, for very clear presentation. Czech Republic would like to ask about carbon capture and mineralization. In its presentation, Iceland mentions carbon capture and mineralization and direct air capture as examples of new mitigation technologies. Which are some of the challenges associated with these technologies, and what could be learned from the experiences made so far with such technologies in Iceland? Thank you.
Thanks, Czech Republic. And 51, Japan. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Iceland, for the very insightful, inspirational presentation, and also answering to our questions. According to the page 43 of the BL, taxes have been levied on all fluorinated gases in proportion to their GWPs since January 2020. Which actor is obliged to pay these taxes? And what are the revenues from these taxes used for? Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. And 62, Luxembourg. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you also, Iceland, for your statement and the pre-recorded presentation that I watched with a very high interest. And in this presentation, you underlined a very specific situation regarding your LULUCF emissions. And indeed, the difference between the total emissions with and without LULUCF is quite remarkable. Then you mentioned also mitigation potential for carbon sequestration via afforestation and revegetation. Could you provide us an example of a mitigation measure which helps reduce emissions in the LULUCF sector in Iceland? Thank you.
Thank you, Luxembourg. And the lastly, I'll give the floor to number 48, India. India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. At the outset, we would like to thank as well as congratulate Iceland for excellent statement and also for uploading the presentation. We have 2 or 3 small points to make, which we shall do one by one. Our first question is Our first point is regarding page number 11 of the BR4. So this page says that metal industry emissions, mostly aluminium plants, the aluminium sector, increased by the emissions in aluminium sector increased by 187% between 1990 to 2017. Does Iceland envisage any steps or technologies to be implemented to reduce these emissions? The second point which we want to understand from Iceland is, can Iceland share the estimated timeline and investments for the new ferries to be powered by electricity? We find that a new ferry will be powered by electricity between the Westman Islands and the mainland. So, and also there is some plan for future replacement of the ferries, taking into account the need to move towards clean energy. So it is in that context we were curious to know. Our third point, of course, pertains to the geothermal energy, because as we understand, Iceland is leader in geothermal energy and generates more than about 1,000 megawatts from geothermal. Would you like to share the details about this, and do you have any plans for hand-holding of the technologies that you have mastered to the other countries? And lastly, of course, Luxembourg had already asked what we wanted to know, but that was more out of our curiosity regarding the projected carbon sequestration potential of the afforestation activities where substantial government funding has been increased. That's how it has been written. So with these, we once again congratulate our colleagues from Iceland for a very nice piece of BR. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, India, and all the questions are from the parties. And now, can I invite Iceland to respond to these questions? Number 15, Iceland.
Thank you. Thank you, Riz, for your questions on charging station and the government's role in it. The government has played a big role in building up of infrastructure regarding the charging stations around the country. And we have had funding for various years. We have open funding which has been granted to both individuals and bigger companies, and the grant has been up to 50% of the cost of the charging stations. They have been built up around the main road in Iceland, and we have also had special funding for hotels and main tourist sites. So on that, this is ongoing, and we think we still have a role to play, so we can secure that everyone can access electricity around Iceland. Regarding the building sector, we have changed the building code and regulations regarding new buildings, and it's new buildings, and when there is a bigger renovation of buildings, then you have to have give access to electricity in that buildings. That is required. And maybe direct to the question from the EU regarding main policies. We have had tax exemption for electrical cars for years, since 2012, if I recall correctly. And we think there is various measures. All the charging stations program and tax exemption, it plays together, and we think we can't point to one specific measure, but it's combined. And also the electricity is more cheaper than fuel, although the cars might be more expensive. So that's also an incentive that people say that is important. Regarding carbon capture and direct air capture, this is still a new technology, and we have one very small direct air capture plant in Iceland, which cooperates with the Carbfix project, where they inject the CO2 down to the basaltic layers, and it mineralizes within 2 years. So that's something that we think is very special, but this is new technology. So, but we are hopeful that it can be used more.
Number 15, Iceland.
Can you hear me? Yeah, yes, sorry. Japan asked about the Florentine taxes and who should pay, and it is the importers that pays the tax, and the revenue goes straight into the state budget. So it's just part of the state budget. India asked about the 2 questions regarding the ferries. We have actually very few ferries in Iceland, and we are proud to say that the ferries you mentioned to Vestmannaeyjar Island is now running on electricity. And I take this ferry frequently, so I can say it's really a game changer. Regarding the metal industry and measures in the metal industry, the aluminum smelters, they fall under the European emission trading scheme. So all the measures taken to reduce the emission from the aluminum smelters are through that scheme. So there are no specific domestic measures regarding the aluminum smelters. Sorry, and last I would like to say to India that regarding the geothermal, and we have had various projects abroad, mainly in Africa and also in China. Icelanders have been involved in building up direct district heating in China, for example. So we think we have been good in exporting our know-how regarding geothermal enhancement. There are 2 other questions regarding LULUCF and adaptation, which I will give the floor to my colleagues here. Anna.
Yes, good morning, thank you. Regarding the question on LULUCF and the government efforts in addressing those emissions, well, Iceland has strengthened and intends to strengthen even more its mitigation efforts in already running programs where landowners, including farmers, are supported by the government to implement mitigation measures. Government agencies also play mitigation efforts on state-owned land. Much emphasis is on restoration efforts, which also incorporate objectives in conserving biodiversity. These measures, they play a key role in meeting the 2030 commitments, but even more important in achieving Iceland's goal of climate neutrality. As you can see on our emissions profile, the emissions from LULUCF are quite high, but Iceland is currently working on addressing the issues that regard uncertainty of these emissions As you know, the uncertainty is quite high, and we have now a plan on addressing the uncertainty and increasing knowledge on the emissions coming from this land. So it's, as I say, much uncertainty, but we are addressing it with a plan that was issued last September.
Give the floor to 14.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Number
all.
14, you have the floor.
Thank you. I would like to answer the question on adaptation. In Iceland, we issued our first adaptation strategy in September. And in the work, we have focused very much on using the strategies and programs that already exist in Iceland, seeking not to complicate things, but to identify gaps and act on them. In the question from UK, you asked about synergies between adaptation and mitigation. And as I said, we are taking our initial steps in making the adaptation program. We are putting a lot of emphasis into knowledge sharing and the knowledge of climate changes and the need for adaptation. And it is our intention that adaptation will be a cornerstone or a fact included in all decision making and planning in the future. We are looking to diverse measures regarding the synergies, such as covering hills with different types of vegetation where there's risk of avalanches. We have our meteorological office that is, has a good experience in oversight, and so this is being basically planned at the moment where there might be risks. And also we are looking at blue-green solutions where they could be implemented into planning. But as I said, we are just taking our initial steps, and we are keen to look on to good experiences from elsewhere. Thank you.
Okay, thank you delegates for the questions, and thank you Iceland for your responses. I would now like to invite Liechtenstein to make a short statement. This statement will be delivered by Heike Sommer from the Office of Environment. Ms. Sommer, you have the floor. Number 35. Liechtenstein, you have the floor.
Thank you, Vice Chair Ambassador Yu. It's good to see you again, and thank you, colleagues, for the submitted and upcoming questions. I start with a brief statement. The 16 questions received on the portal were answered before the deadline, and the pre-recorded video was submitted in due time on October 25th. First, I need to correct myself in the presentation because I mentioned 2017 as the publication year of our national adaptation strategy, and the actual work was done in 2017, but the strategy was published in 2018. So I'm deeply sorry for my slip of the tongue and the following mix-up. So for an update of our national mitigation actions, the government of Liechtenstein intends to be climate neutral by 2050 and is now in the process of preparing the long-term low emissions development strategy. In parallel, the government considers as well to update Liechtenstein's NDCs. But both the long-term low emissions development strategy as well as the updated NDCs must be approved by Parliament. The actual CO2 Act is under revision, and we are here depending on Switzerland. The first monitor report of our new energy strategy 2030 is also in preparation. I also like to share our experiences with the multilateral assessment. Regarding the multilateral assessment process, as a representative from a small state with a small administration, the multilateral assessment process is a huge burden for us. Next to the review of the BR, there is the question and answer period, which means a lot of additional work for us. And the MA process uses up a lot of time, which could be used to develop new national mitigation actions. And the final presentation and live Q&A session should be scheduled at the beginning of the sessions to allow time for small delegations to fully engage in the negotiations. Thank you for that, and I'm happy to answer further questions now. Back to you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Heike Sommer. Now I'd like to open the floor for questions from parties I will collect a number of questions from parties before inviting the delegate from Liechtenstein to respond. The floor is yours. Now I can see 62. Luxembourg. You have the floor. 62.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Liechtenstein, for the presentation, the statement also. A bit of a special question to you. You're the smallest country that is participating to the EU ETS scheme. And do you think there are some challenges or some disadvantages to participate to that, or you see that participation more as an advantage? Being a small country surrounded by a larger country in the EU and to be part of this ETS scheme. So a bit your feeling about this participation to that scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Luxembourg. And 57, Switzerland, you have the floor.
Switzerland thanks its neighbor Liechtenstein for presenting the fourth biennial report and answering the written question. According to the information presented by Liechtenstein, an assumption underpinning the party's Climate Vision 2050 is that in several sectors greenhouse gas will continue to be emitted and will have to be compensated for in order to achieve the net zero emission by 2050. Does Liechtenstein actively support the development of removal options such as carbon sinks and/or carbon capture technology, or are there plans to do so in the future?
Okay, thank you, Switzerland. And 25, the Czech Republic, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Liechtenstein, for clear presentation. Czech Republic would like to ask a question about solar power generation. According to Liechtenstein's presentation, solar power generation has increased significantly in recent years. Was this increase supported by specific policies and measures, such as regulations or incentives? Thank you.
I think the Czech Republic and 54, UK, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Liechtenstein for the presentation. We were particularly interested to hear that the energy strategy for 2030 includes measures relating to education and raising awareness. Please could you tell us more about how you engage the public and civil society in developing Liechtenstein's energy policy? Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. And the 66, you have the floor.
Thank you, Liechtenstein, for your presentation, also for replying to the written questions submitted by the EU. According to your presentation, the transport sector provides the highest potential to reduce emissions in the future. We also heard in your presentation that more than half of the workforce commutes every day from the neighboring countries to Liechtenstein. Could you say more about the existing or planned measures in the transport sector that address these daily commutes? Thank you.
Thank you, EU. And lastly, I'd like to give the floor to India, number 48. India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to congratulate our brothers and sisters from Liechtenstein. I hope, first of all, I pronounced the name of your country correctly. Did I? I would like to, as I said, please accept our heartiest congratulations. Our question relates to page 11 of BR4, table 2.3. In the sector category called other sector category, I am referring to 1A4, category 1A4, page 11 BR4, table 2.3. So this category, other sector, remains the topmost emitter throughout 1990 to 2017 in the overall energy sector. So we are wanting to know what you have apportioned in this sector, which, because in the other category, we normally apportion what we are not able to apportion in the remaining subsectors within the energy sector. So what are the sources of emission included in this other category sector? That's a small point. Again, out of our quest to understand the overall energy sector of your country. The second point is about the policies and measures that you have aimed explicitly at reducing the GHG from the industrial processes. And also, we would rather love to know more in terms of innovations with regard to the wastewater treatment and discharge in your country. With these small points of curiosity or questions or queries, if you may say so, we once again congratulate you on an excellent statement. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, India. And now I can see one more question from the party, two parties. Number 59, China, you have the floor.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for Liechtenstein's presentation. And we are very interested in your energy strategy. And could you please share more experience and achievements in your implementation of the energy strategy 2020? And could you also give more details about the new energy strategy 2030? What's like most important and different from the last strategy? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, China. Now we have all the questions from the parties, and now can I invite Liechtenstein, number 35, to respond to these questions. Liechtenstein, you have the floor. 35.
Yes, and thank you for so many questions, which I try to answer to my best. Regarding the question from Luxembourg to the participation in the emissions trading schemes of the EU. Well, the advantage was that we had 2 installations in Liechtenstein participating in the EU ETS, and both had major emissions reductions. So now they could make use of this small emitters exemption, and we're now in the process of trying to be excluded from the EU ETS. The disadvantage was that it's very, it's a lot of administration work with the EU ETS, and especially if you have only 2 installations in the emissions trading schemes. So then next I will go to the question from Switzerland. Thank you also for this question. In our Climate Vision 2050, carbon removals are foreseen, but only after Liechtenstein managed to reduce all emissions domestically. We intend to reduce all emissions in our country before we engage in negative emission technologies. And in the meantime, we're also considering natural things projects, but it's depending on the outcome of Article 6 negotiations. Then I go to the question from my colleague from the Czech Republic. It's regarding the solar power increase. Yeah, it was in the National Energy Efficiency Act, and we give subsidies for the installation of solar panels. Then I go to the question from the United Kingdom. Thank you also for that one. For the education, the government of Liechtenstein engaged with the foundation to educate the youth. So we have a dual education system in Liechtenstein, and with this project, the government engaged. In principle, all school children will have contact to energy efficiency and climate change mitigation. It's called like Energy Pioneers and Climate Pioneers. Then I go to the question from the European Union. Also, thank you for this question. Yes, regarding the transport sector, we are in a difficult situation because we are strongly dependent on the daily commuters, and we also had other plans in mind, but now with our our mobility concept is now under review, and I think we have to focus more on buses and bus lanes, and there is also the mobility management systems in place, and I think the government is reviewing additional measurements. And also thank you for India. And yeah, it's pronounced Liechtenstein, so you did it very well. Thank you for that. And regarding the table 11A4, other sectors, that's mainly the building sectors, meaning our heating systems of all the buildings. And there, the emissions fluctuate depending on a cold winter or a warm winter, or if the CO2 levy is increased. And with the Energy Efficiency Act, we try and promote the energy efficiency of buildings, as also the heat insulation and window exchange, so that the buildings will be more efficient in the future. So for the industrial processes, also the Energy Efficiency Act is in place, and also the CO2 levy tries to force companies to be more energy efficient. And innovations for the wastewater treatment, there I would like to mention that in the future we also try to capture the phosphor out of the wastewater. So so for the long run we don't use that many let me check. Just a second. Okay, so we don't need that many fertilizer or artificial fertilizer in the future because we can reuse the phosphor from the wastewater. Then I switch to the question from China. Let me check. So the Energy Strategy 2020 was a good basis for the development of the Energy Strategy 2030, and we included some additional measures, but mainly we enforced the existing measures, like I mentioned before, subsidies for solar panels and also subsidies for renovation of buildings, and to increase renewable energies or the renewable energy production within the country. And part of this Energy Strategy 2030 was also the Energy Vision 2050, and there the government foresees that by 2050 Liechtenstein will be independent on fossil fuels for the energy sector, and also the energy efficiency will be increased. So I think I answered all your questions, and thank you, and back to you, Vice Chair.
Thank you, delegates, for the questions, and thank you, Liechtenstein, for your responses. Now I'd like to invite Luxembourg number 61 to make a short statement. This statement will be delivered by André Weidenhaupt from the Ministry of the Environment, Climate and Sustainable Development. Mr. Weidenhaupt, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, distinguished delegates, colleagues. Thank you for facilitating this opportunity again, as is done every 2 years, to deliver on behalf of Luxembourg some more inside view on the multilateral assessment. Since the pre-recorded presentation has been uploaded, we had 93 views on the internet, and we are very proud of it because when we visited this just prior to this session, it was by far the largest views from all the delegations that have uploaded presentations. I don't know why. We hope that those parties which have seen our presentation on the COP26 Multilateral Assessment website found it interesting. We also would like to thank again those parties which showed interest in our progress and achievements by submitting their questions that have all been answered. In my brief statement, I would like to share with you major recent developments in Luxembourg's climate policy. We are confident that these developments will help Luxembourg reaching its 2030 unilateral goal, which is reaching a reduction of 55% of our non-ETS greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 as compared to the 2005 level. But firstly, according to our 2020 approximated inventory, our 2020 target should be reached. Nevertheless, to be totally transparent, this is mostly the consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic-related lockdowns and reduced economic activities, as well as teleworking that dramatically reduced road transportations for weeks, hence road fuel sales, which is our main source of greenhouse gas emissions. On the latest developments put in place in Luxembourg, I would like to stress that our minus 55% goal in 2030, as well as climate neutrality at the latest by 2050, are now enshrined in both our national climate law, which has been adopted 15th December 2020, and our recently adopted long-term strategy. Let's start with the climate law that followed the preparation of our National Energy and Climate Plan under EU legislation. The law sets 2030 goals and 2021 to 2030 trajectories for 5 emitting non-ETS sectors and paths. To complement one of our written answers to a United States question, there are indeed already interesting lessons learned from that process. Mainly, the law provides a legal background to discussions between ministries for defining the sectoral objectives and trajectories. The law was also a strong motivation for reaching rather quickly an agreement on that particular issue. The climate law also proposes a multi-stakeholder platform and a scientific climate observatory to help the government in monitoring, assessing, and defining the best possible policies and measures. And very recently, the Prime Minister in October, in his speech to the State of the Nation before Parliament, launched a Citizens' Council in the field of climate action. In this respect, we would like to stress 2 of our most prominent policies and measures, a new one since 1st January 2021, the newly introduced CO2 tax, and an older one that has proven its efficiency both in reduction of emissions but also in raising awareness of all actors, and that is now in its second phase, the Climate Pact with all municipalities. Other important measures in place or planned to be reinforced are listed in our presentation, including free public transport effective as of 1st of March 2020, and the beginning of the pandemic, which therefore prevents us to assess correctly its effects. Thank you very much for your attention, and me and all the team, which I am very grateful for, are ready to answer your questions.
Thank you, Luxembourg. I would now like to open the floor for questions from parties. I will collect a number of questions from parties before inviting the delegate from Luxembourg to respond. Now, floor is yours. I can see the 53 UK, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Luxembourg for their presentation. We noticed in the pre-recorded presentation that one of the challenges you identified was that municipalities in Luxembourg are relatively autonomous. Could you tell us what challenges you faced in coordinating, or you do face in coordinating climate action across different levels of government, and any advice you'd give to other parties that might be in a similar position? Thank you very much.
Thank you, UK. And okay, India, number 48. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And we wanted to congratulate our brothers and sisters from Luxembourg, and that was the primary purpose of taking the floor, and also learning from them their good practices that they have undertaken. So at the outset, please accept our congratulations. Our questions are out of reading your BR. So we find that the total emissions, they stand at around 10.5 million tons and net emissions 10.3. In that backdrop, we just wanted to understand the LULUCF sector, which has fluctuated from minus 119 gigaton to gigagram to 717 gigagrams throughout 1991 to 2018. Could you, because if it is 50, 100 gigagrams this side, that side, one can understand, but this huge fluctuations, one wonders how this much fluctuation, why was this possible? And in the same vein, we also note that the party has reported a 47% increase in GHG removals between the 2 years 2017 and 18 in the LULUCF sector. So would you like to elaborate on the reasons thereof? Also, we find that there are a lot of measures which you also touched upon in the transport sector, like increasing the share of electric mobility and then use of second generation biofuels, bringing a vehicular tax reform that would align with the polluter pays principle, and introduction of free public transport since 1st of March 2020. So would you like to comment on the impacts of this strategy or these proposals? And also, would you also like to state something on the policy instruments to reduce the emissions relating to road fuel being sold and used by non-residents and so on and so forth? So could you please share your experiences? Once again, congratulations to our friends from Luxembourg. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, India, for your active participation in this session. And I can see no more questions from the parties. And then can I invite Luxembourg 61 to respond to these two questions? Luxembourg, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So first, many thanks for the question from the delegations of United Kingdom and India. UK asked about the challenges with the plethora of municipalities. Luxembourg has on its small territory still 102 municipalities and a legal framework that goes back to Napoleon times. which sets a very large autonomy to the municipalities. With this, and there's no other level of governance between municipalities and the national level. With this and with the conviction that local action is very important, Luxembourg's government has set up, and that is set up that I have also already addressed in my brief introduction, the so-called Climate Pact. This is a legal framework initially set by law and redrafted, initially set in 2013 and redrafted earlier this year for a second phase, which basically asks for voluntary adherence, but as soon as you voluntarily have adhered, then it comes with a mandatory scheme of obligations and a regular assessment. The second phase will be a little bit more restrictive than the first one, and basically it's a voluntary buy-in from municipalities, and as of that, the municipalities will have a set of measures to be put in place, and they are assessed annually in this respect. There are different levels of achievement, and basically you end up with different levels that you can achieve, and you start somehow a benchmarking between the municipalities. Even though it was and still is voluntary, we had all municipalities joining in for the first phase, and we have, although we only launched it earlier this year, early summer, we have already more than 90 municipalities that have already also entered the second phase of this scheme. And somehow this benchmarking sets somehow a competition between the municipalities to come with local action in climate change. We think this is a way on encompassing these challenges of large autonomy at municipal level. A second element to give somehow a steer to municipal action is subsidies. The government provides subsidies to municipalities from the Climate and Energy Fund, which gets revenues from fuel sales, from the car registration tax, from the EU ETS auctioning revenues, and then these revenues are used for subsidies, for instance, when municipalities install renewable energy schemes and so on. So that helps these municipal levels. I would now go to the question related to transport by India, and my colleague Eric de Brabanter will give an answer to India's question related to the LULUCF sector. India is correctly seen in our fourth biannual report that we have a whole set of measures in the field of transport to increase both the share of electric mobility in the field of individual mobility. For instance, car sales from beginning of this year until to date has reached a share of 17% of electric mobility cars, be it hybrid cars, plug-in hybrids, or full electric, battery electric vehicles by 17%, which is, I think, a success story. Then free public transport is one of the measures. Second generation biofuels is one of the measures. But the most important measure to tackle the fuel sales to non-residents is the newly introduced CO2 tax, which will come with an increase beginning of next year and also beginning of 2023. So it has been fixed at €20 a ton CO2 emitted. For this year, it will be €25 per ton CO2 emitted next year and 30 euro a ton in 2023. This helps to decrease the differential between fuel prices in Luxembourg and its 3 neighboring countries in a way that fuel sales drop down. And for instance, we already see a clear tendency in the way we anticipated it when the tax was introduced. Fuel sales in the 9 first months of this year, where we had no slowdown of the economy anymore, and basically the economy running at a compared velocity, then maybe it's not the correct word, but I'm not a native speaker, so for that, at a comparable pace than in 2019, but we have seen that observed a reduction of road fuel sales in 2020 as compared even to the 9 early months in 2021 as compared to the same period in 2020 when we had the slowdown of the related to the pandemic. So basically we have achieved, but maybe it's a little bit too early to assess it completely, but we have achieved what was anticipated, a slowing down of fuel sales outside Luxembourg, because this is a very important part of our transport sector related CO2 emissions. And I remind the distinguished delegate from India, who asked me the same question, or who asked me a little bit more a tricky question 4 years ago in Bonn at our second biannual report, being multi-assessed, when he said when Luxembourg will finally come with an adaptation of his tax regimes. We did it, and I think it was a good decision, a good move to do so. So this is what is our main measure to cut these down. And in addition to that, there's a new proposal by the European Union to enlarge the European ETS to fuel road fuel sales, and I think this will give an additional steer in the reduction of sales of fuels in Luxembourg. And now I hand over to my colleague Eric de Brabanter to address the question related to LULUCF.
Okay, number 62, yeah, another delegate from Iceland, you have the floor. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, André, and thank you also, India, for the question. Just perhaps to complement what André said, he mentioned, of course, the fuel sales, but also other measures you mentioned on mobility. It's, of course, a bit more difficult to assess them now, because some of these measures enter into force at the beginning of 2020, and then we have the lockdown. So it's very difficult now to really see at that stage what are the effects. So we have to wait a few more months that everything turns back to normal, even if we hope that teleworking will go on, because that's something that will also relieve the fuel sales in Luxembourg, leading to less fuel sales. So back to the LULUCF question. Yes, you're totally right that our emissions that are reported is a very erratic series, putting apart perhaps the 2 first years, 1990 and 1991, where there were large storms that touched Luxembourg, and that a lot of trees were cut down by the wind. Then we have emission, at least in 1990, that was not a sink, but a source of emission because of these storms. The series is, of course, fluctuating quite a lot. I'm not a very good specialist on LULUCF emission, and unfortunately no colleagues on LULUCF are here. But what I know about the series is that the information that we have on forest is in fact depending, and the emission calculation is depending on statistics that are collected not every year on the situation of the forest, but every 5 or 10 years sometimes. And each time new figures are coming, it's possible to recalculate some of the LULUCF emission, but it's not possible to recalculate the whole series. So that could lead to some break in time series actually for LULUCF. And we also now try to really improve this calculation by using satellite images to have a better assessment of how the forests are evolving in Luxembourg. And we also have now projects in the framework of this National Energy and Climate Plan. We are now developing very specific policies and measures in the framework of that plan. There's a collaboration now that will take place between agriculture people and also the forestry people to define specific policies and measures for forestry, something that we didn't really do in the past because we didn't count about LULUCF emissions to reach our 2020 targets. So to be honest, we neglected a bit this sector in our assessment and work because we are a small country with a small team, so we really focus on the most important emissions for us, which are transport and buildings. And yes, so there are plans to really improve and revise the series. I've been told recently by one of my colleagues working on that we might expect a revised series on LULUCF in the coming months for the next submission, perhaps, of the National Inventory Report. So yes, we hope to have better figures for that and also a better understanding of the reason why these figures are fluctuating so much. Thank you.
Thank you, delegates, for the questions, and thank you, Luxembourg, for your responses. Now I'd like to make closing remarks. Delegates and colleagues, today we have heard from 5 parties. I'd like to extend my thanks and congratulate you all for actively engaging in these very fruitful and positive discussions. This type of interaction embodies the true spirit and the principles of the IAR process. I'm sure we have all benefited from today's interactions. I would now like to suspend the session and resume tomorrow with the second part of MA. We will meet again on Saturday, 6th of November at 3:30 in the afternoon for the MA of Monaco, Poland, Romania, Slovenia, and the United Kingdom, followed by the joint closing of FSV and MA. Please further note that the opening of the facilitative share of views will begin in 8 minutes, starting from 5:45 in the afternoon in this same room. We wish you a pleasant the rest of your day and look forward to seeing you at the next MA session. Thank you so much indeed.